David, a sociopath hidden behind the veneer of a charming, successful man, had mastered the art of manipulation. His targets were always the same: weak, isolated, and vulnerable. He thrived on controlling their emotions, breaking them down piece by piece, leaving them shattered and moving on without a trace of remorse. One night, David wandered into a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town. His cold eyes scanned the room until they settled on her. Sarah. She was sitting alone in a corner booth, nursing a drink, her shoulders hunched in quiet defeat. She looked perfect, an easy target. David slid into the booth without asking and offered her a charismatic smile. "Rough night?" he asked in a voice dripping with false concern. Sarah glanced up, her blue eyes briefly locking with his. She seemed hesitant, but then nodded. "Yeah, something like that." David thought he had her figured out. She was probably struggling with something, maybe a breakup, loneliness, or financial stress. Whatever it was something he could exploit. For weeks, David reeled her in. He was the perfect friend, then the perfect confidant, and eventually her lover. He knew how to make Sarah feel safe, even though he had no real interest in her well-being. He only wanted to see her crumble beneath his control. But Sarah wasn't crumbling. In fact, she was doing the opposite. She started gaining confidence, standing up to him in subtle ways, testing his patience. One evening, David decided it was time to escalate. He began to chip away at her trust with cruel, underhanded comments and gaslighting. But no matter how hard he pushed, Sarah didn't react like his other victims had. She didn't break. She just smiled. And that's when things started to go wrong for David. Subtle at first. He would find his keys misplaced or his phone dead when he was sure it had been charged. Little things, but they unnerved him. One night, after another failed attempt to manipulate Sarah, he returned to his apartment to find it ransacked. His heart raced as he searched through the mess. Nothing was missing, but everything was out of place. He confronted Sarah the next day, seething. "Did you do this?" She tilted her head, her face a mask of innocence. "Do what?" David's stomach twisted. Something was off about her, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He spent the next few days growing increasingly paranoid. The mind games he had perfected over the years were suddenly turned against him. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't think straight. He felt hunted. Desperate for control, David went to her house late one night. He was done playing nice. He would confront her, maybe scare her, and put her back in her place. He knocked on her door, but no one answered. The door was unlocked, so he let himself in. The house was dark and eerily quiet. As he stepped further inside, a chill ran down his spine. Then he saw her. Sarah stood in the doorway to the kitchen, watching him with a calm, detached expression. "David," she said softly, "you thought you could control me, didn't you?" He felt a strange, rising fear. "What are you talking about?" Sarah's smile was cold and knowing. "I've been watching you since the day we met. You're not the first sociopath I've dealt with, and you won't be the last, but you are the weakest." Before David could react, Sarah stepped forward, closing the gap between them. He tried to step back, but his legs felt heavy, his vision blurring. Panic gripped him as he realized something was very wrong. "The drink," Sarah whispered. "You should have been more careful." David's legs gave way, and he collapsed onto the floor. His mind raced, but his body was failing him. As darkness closed in, he saw Sarah standing over him, her face devoid of emotion. "You picked the wrong prey," she murmured. "You thought I was your victim, but I've been hunting you from the start." And with that, the last thing David felt was the cold satisfaction of a predator who had finally met their match.